Okay.
Welcome to the 12th installment of The Living History of Bill Thomson. I'm Relendra, interviewing my father, Bill Thomson, about his life and experiences. And we're picking up where we left off in 1969. And you had a few things that you wanted to share.
Yeah, that was the year I graduated with the doctorate. Did I all mention about when Father Bill came out and all that stuff? No.
I don't think so. You mentioned your father and your brother coming out for graduation.
Yeah, and so did Father Bill.
Oh, he was there too. Okay.
Yeah, and I went through the ceremony, and they said it was too darn hot, so they watched it on TV.
Yeah.
I think that's where we left off.
Yeah.
And one thing I remember from that, let's see, Amy. I think Amy was born around that time.
Yeah, she was born on June 3rd. So it would have been right around the time of
Yeah, yeah.
graduation.
And so your mom was in the hospital, delivering the baby.
Okay.
And I do remember I got in big trouble because my brother and Father Bill, and we took the two kids, Leslie and Paul, up into the hills of Idaho. And when your mom found out about it, she had a cat fit.
Okay.
Yeah, because were you watching them? I said, well, sure.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, the kids enjoyed it.
Where'd you take them? Like Kamiak Butte or someplace like that?
Yeah, it's Kamiak Butte, I think is where we went. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, it was your mom was not too happy about that.
Okay. So let's see. At the time, Paul would have been 4 years old.
Right.
And Leslie would have just turned 3.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and then, they could. We didn't go that far, but we let them explore, and what have you, and then they got up to Kamiak Butte and saw it. It was pretty spectacular. Particularly kids that age.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Had your father retired yet at this point? Was he still working?
Let's see, what year was that?
1969.
No, he was retired by then.
Okay.
Yeah, and because he could take early retirement, they had a really pretty generous retirement program. And the way my dad looked at it, he had jobs on the side. He worked for Ace Studios because he was real good with the kids. And so whenever they did school shots and all, he was in charge of getting them in order and that kind of thing. So he retired as soon as he could.
Okay.
And Father Bill, he made his own time, because by that point he was I think a Monsignor. And I think I told you that they have a school and a church named after him up in Massachusetts, right?
I think you have mentioned that once to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's after he retired. It's called the Monsignor William Thomson. I don't know what the church was called, and then he built a high school as well.
Okay.
So his name is up, and it's in Falmouth, Massachusetts, which is on Cape Cod.
Okay. So what does it mean to be a Monsignor?
Well, it's, bishop, you get to be a priest, and then a Monsignor is kind of like a senior priest.
Okay.
But it's not in the hierarchy of the church. The next hierarchical step would be a bishop.
Okay.
But he ran a reform school down in New Bedford, and he did a lot of things. He's very, very well known in New Bedford because he did so much for the community down there.
Yeah.
And he was an interesting person to talk to. So I told you the story, didn't I? When my dad and Father Bill and your mom's dad were all discussing things, and Grandpa Edney asked, about being a priest and not being able to marry. Did I tell you that story?
About kind of like how he had to be able to run into a building on fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. but the way the way your grandfather told it, it was so cool. And,
Mhm.
he just like looked as if he must be ignorant or something, but you do know that firemen and policemen go into burning buildings all the time.
Uh-huh. Well, they can't deliver last rites, though.
What's that?
But firemen and policemen can't deliver last rites.
No, that's right. But they go in despite the danger, and
Yeah,
that's what he was saying. That's why they don't marry, because it's too dangerous.
right.
Uh,
Let's see. So how was your father doing? So he was retired, but your mom had died
yeah,
at this point, and
yeah. She died when we were living in Maryland.
yeah. So how was he coping
What's
after
that?
how was your father coping?
You know, I really don't. At one point, he finally moved down and lived with my brother in New Jersey,
Okay.
and they sold the house. And it was quite. I think they paid. God, I think the house was $15,000,
Okay.
and it was on two levels,
Hmm.
so I don't know how many square foot it had, and a pretty big lot.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of money, that they made on that. So, and of course, my brother and I got some of it, and so.
Yeah. And how was your brother doing at this point?
Well, he was working for a con man
Oh yeah.
in New Jersey who was supposedly running a brokerage, but it was really sleazy.
Okay.
But so he would always be coming out with these new stocks. I forget what they called them,
Uh-huh.
and he would float rumors all over the place that this stock was coming out and it was going to be incredible. And if you got in on before it came on the market, you'd really make a lot of money. So
Mhm.
my brother was working for him, and so he told me about that. And I said, "Well, can you get me some of that?"
Mhm.
So so he started doing that, and oh my God, I mean, I would make $5,000 in one day, and then the stock would go way up, and uh, and you knew it was going to come plummeting down real quick.
Yeah.
And so my brother said, "Why are you selling it in one day?" I said, "Because it's all a piece of junk. I'm just trying to make money."
Uh-huh.
But my brother believed in that stuff.
Okay.
But I must have done 5 or 6 of those.
Okay.
And it was enough to really, that's how we ended up being able to buy a house and everything else.
Right. And you bought your first house that year?
Yeah, that's right. Right when I graduated.
Uh-huh. And so what was that house like?
Well, I had a basement, full basement,
Mhm.
and then a main floor. Let's see, there were 2 bedrooms on the main floor. I think there were two. It wasn't a lot of square footage, but when you added the 2 floors up, it was.
Mhm.
It was probably about, if I were to guess, I would say maybe it was 1,000 square foot in each level.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, we bought that, and of course, the prices just kept going up. And then we eventually, I can't remember why we sold it, but I got the money to, and then oh yeah, well, then your mom wanted to learn to drive, so
Okay.
we had to, and of course, I had the Volvo was a stick shift,
Uh-huh.
and oh, your mom tried driving it, and it was not good.
Okay.
So she had to get a car that was automatic,
Okay.
and so I went met the First Bank of Troy in Troy, Idaho,
Yeah.
and I called them up and I said, I want to borrow some money to buy a car.
Mhm.
And he said, and he asked who I was, and he looked it up. He said, "Oh yeah, yeah, you've been with us here for a couple of years." I
Uh-huh.
said, "Yeah." I said, "So, what do I do to, how do I apply for a loan?" He says, "Well, how much do you want?" I said, "About $5,000." He said, "No problem."
Uh-huh.
I said, "Well, do I have to apply?" "Nah, we'll fill out the paperwork later."
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I had $5,000, and we bought a car for your mom to learn how to drive.
Well, that's really interesting. A car would cost about $5,000, but an entire house was only 15,000.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. Uh,
Hmm. So what kind of car did you get?
the Volvo.
Well, you already had the Volvo, right?
No, no. Oh, wait a minute.
You were saying you had to buy a
Remember now.
car that was automatic
No,
transmission.
no, no. You're right. We got the car so your mom could learn to drive. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think it was a Toyota,
Okay.
and oh, she was something learning how to, because her dad never, he tried to teach her on the stick shift with a
Mhm.
clutch, and of
Yeah.
course your mom would always be popping the clutch, and your grandfather had very little patience with that, and he told her that she would never learn to drive and forget about it.
Okay. Yeah.
So she was pretty nervous,
Uh-huh.
and I was nervous riding next to her.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, she finally got over it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I guess all of this means is that you decided to stay in Idaho when you graduated. We haven't talked about that yet.
Well, trying to remember if I had any. It seems to me did have an offer or two somewhere else, but it was like in the deep South or something. I didn't want to go there.
Hmm.
And then Bob Ferguson, who was he became dean at Idaho,
Okay.
and he wasn't dean when he hired me, but he was in some academic position, uh, and he's the one that convinced me to stay at Idaho.
Hmm.
And I told him about the salary. I think I had an offer from somewhere, and he looked and he looked it up and he said, "Well, I'm looking at the pay scale, and Lou Edwards, who's been teaching there for 3 years, with what you're saying you should get, that would be about the same salary as he's getting." I said, "Well, give him more."
Uh-huh.
Anyway, we negotiated it finally,
Okay.
and it was great. I loved teaching. I loved the students.
Uh-huh.
They were really, really, really good.
Uh-huh.
And Jay Sheldorf and I ended up team teaching the real hard junior year course. It's called Unit Operations,
Okay.
and the students were totally amused by it all, because we had agreed if we were going to team teach it, that when one of us was teaching, the other would sit in the audience. So we always knew what the other guy was doing.
Yeah.
And we were teaching transport phenomena, so I was doing the theoretical, mathematical part of it, and Jay was doing the down to earth nuts and bolts of the stuff. So
Okay.
it was a great combo. It was a great course, and the students really enjoyed it because they got to see both worlds, as it was changing.
Yeah.
And but the funny part is that when Jay would sit in the audience, he always had a bag of potato chips.
Okay.
And I remember I was up there lecturing at my turn, and I started smelling. I didn't know he had potato chips. I said, "Somebody eating potato chips?" And Jay looked up, and he had the bag, and he held up the bag. He says, "I always eat potato chips when I come to the circus." So the students got a real different picture of what professors could be like.
Uh-huh. I remember you telling a story once about the decision to stay in Idaho, where you were talking
Yeah.
about it with my mom because you had some other offers. You had some offers in industry, as I remember.
And yeah, oh yeah, I had a bunch of offers in industry. I mean, everybody
Yeah.
wanted to hire back then,
Uh-huh.
and Union Carbide had an offer, Union Oil,
Yeah.
um, and a design company. I can't remember the name of it now. Yeah, but I taught when I was a graduate student, and
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, and that's what I really wanted to do. And all of a sudden, they had a prof who was really bad, Irving Dunn,
Mhm.
and got his PhD from Princeton, and he had no idea how to teach or how to teach undergrads, the mechanics and the practical part of engineering.
Yeah.
And so he saw it was not going well. He was getting bad reviews, so he got a job in industry, and that opened up an opening very, very quickly, right about the time I was ready to finishing my PhD. So they
Yeah.
offered the job to me since I was there.
Uh-huh.
So it was good fortune.
Yeah. And I remember you saying that you had made an agreement with her that, because after you finished getting your doctorate, if she wanted to leave Idaho, that you could, but that she agreed to stay there because you'd had a good time with the graduate students. You had a good social life at that time.
But we did, and your mom participated in a lot of the, she got to know a lot of the students, got to know their wives and things, it was if she changed her mind, her idea, of course, of Idaho was the total boondocks when we got there,
Yeah.
But then she made some friends,
Mhm.
and I remember, was it you? Couldn't have been you. What year were you born again?
I was born in 1980.
Okay, so that couldn't have been. It must have been your brother, but she had this friend. I can't remember, Marion, I think her name was, and Marion would come over, and your mom would go somewhere, and I'd be, I was teaching at that time, and then in the summer, this is in the summer, and so she had them. I remember your brother telling me, yeah, she had us rake up all the leaves in the driveway. We were living on West C Street at the time, and move them all under the bushes, and then
Oh,
then about a week later, she'd have them move them all out again.
this was actually an experience I had, but it was years later. This was like maybe the early 90s.
Oh, maybe it was you I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Marion would come up with
That's it.
sort of projects for us to do.
Yeah.
And one of them was to rake all the leaves out from underneath the bushes and then hose them down with water.
Right.
So that the entire driveway was covered with mud.
Yeah.
And another one was to take off all the Venetian blinds off
Yeah,
the windows and put them in the dishwasher.
I remember that now. Yeah. She was quite a character.
Yeah.
But your mom had so few friends,
Yeah.
And
So that was years later. I guess what I'm remembering is that you had a good social life when you were a grad student, but then the graduate students kind of moved away and took different jobs
right.
and things. And social life was a little bit harder after you became a professor.
Yeah. Because a lot of the faculty were, they had faculty-itis.
Uh-huh.
But one of the problems with Lou Edwards was his wife.
Okay.
And Lou was very easy to get along with. He had no delusions of grandeur or anything, but she really felt the wife of a professor, was really important and all. And she was kind of a miserable person. She wasn't nasty. She was just miserable.
Okay.
And so it was hard to even get friends or anything else, So, but Jay Sheldorf was there.
Right.
And so your mom got to be really good friends with his wife.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Marilyn.
Marilyn Sheldorf, yeah.
Yeah. So, that was a saving grace. And that's why I think your mom said she could live with me staying on as a professor.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah. Well, so yeah, you've got a newborn baby, Amy, and then Paul and Leslie about 3 and 4 years old at this time.
right.
Any more stories from those kids about that age? What their personalities were like?
Right.
Anything that you remember?
Well, I do remember we moved at that point into the house on, what was it, 7th Avenue?
Yeah, East 7th Street. Yeah.
It's 7th Street. And I may have told you this story already, but we had this big brand new house. And your mom used to say we had no money for furniture.
Uh-huh.
So we had this big living room. And your mom always said, the only thing this thing is good for is selling carpet.
Uh-huh.
So I said, well, we'll get some money together. We'll have to do it slowly. Anyway, Paul and Leslie they were little guys at the time, and they would crawl up to the big sliding glass door.
Mhm.
And we had a cat. Her name was Nana, I think.
Okay.
And Nana had kittens because she was outdoors and she got pregnant. She had like 6 or 7 kittens. And the kittens would line up behind her. It was really interesting to watch her. And then she'd walk a little bit and then she'd turn around to make sure they were still all in line.
Uh-huh.
And so one point, Paul and Leslie are on their knees at the big sliding glass door watching her. And your mom says, "Oh my God, there's a mouse out there. So she's going to get this mouse. The kids are going to be terrified. And all of a sudden we hear Paul say, "Nana, share that mouse with your kitties." So much for being traumatized.
Right. Well, anything else you remember from that period of time around when you're moving into this new house, starting as a professor, early 70s?
Yeah, and enjoyed my job. It was a lot of fun. And then that was the first year we went down to California, to Union Oil. I was only teaching about a year or two, and Bob Ferguson was the department head. And he called me in and he said, "There's a new program out where the powers that be in academia and engineering academia said they've got a real problem because all the faculty, none of them have any industrial experience." So they came up with this program, an NDEA program, Non-Defense Education Association.
Okay.
And they paid all the travel expenses, and they paid some kind of a stipend as long as the company you went to work for 1 year paid you some kind of a wage that was comparable with what engineers were making. And so there it was. And right at that time, the president of Union Oil Research, I can't remember his name, came up to give a talk to the chemical engineering department. And that all happened just at the same time. So I got to talk to him.
Yeah.
And I told him about this program. I said, "Would there be any opportunity for me to go, if I accept this program, to go down to work for you for a year? But keep in mind, it would only be for a year, and then I would come back." And he said, "Well, that sounds like a good idea."
Okay.
And lo and behold, that's how we got down to Union Oil down there in Southern Cal. And of course, your mom loved it because it was Southern California.
Yeah. So you lived down there for a year?
1 year, and then came back to the university.
Okay. What did you still have the house on 7th Street at that time?
I'm trying to remember. No, yes, because we rented it out. No, that was the other house. No, we must have been in the blue house by then.
Okay.
But I know when we left, I can't remember. I took a sabbatical of them. I've got them all mixed up in my mind. But I know at one point we were living on West C Street, and we got to know the Calverts. And but then when we left, this wasn't the same time. This was later on. We left and we rented the house to the Blue House to this family that had a bunch of kids, and they got to be real friendly with the Calverts. And your mom never hit it off with the Calverts because she didn't do the university type thing.
Yeah.
And it was when we moved back, there were no light bulbs in any of the lights. The people who rented it for a year had just taken all the light bulbs with them. Can you imagine? So, but that was the Blue House at that point. So,
right.
And I can't remember how we got rid of the house on East 7th Street, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I was wondering, because if you were gone for a year and you bought the Blue House on West C Street around that time in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you just didn't have a house for a year or if you held on to one of the houses and rented it out.
Yes. Yeah, I think when I went down there to California for a year, we rented it out to this family. And then they wanted to stay there, and it was very complicated. I can't remember. It was a very bad experience. And But we finally got rid of it and bought the Blue House. And it was your mom who wanted the Blue House because she said she felt intimidated by, the house in East 7th Street because it was a brand new house with a lot of new stuff. And the Blue House was this old fashioned house, and she loved it.
Let's see. And then, then Amy would have been getting to about 3 years old, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Paul
That's
and
right.
Leslie are getting into school.
Yeah.
So you're starting to kind of get to know the personalities of the kids and maybe develop some family traditions and things like that.
Well, I do remember Paul was just into everything.
Uh-huh.
And I remember at one point the police came
Yeah.
and what did he call himself? Tom? He had some nickname he gave himself. And he
Oh,
had a
Stompy. I remember.
Stompy, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And he had a Moscow High jacket on,
Uh-huh.
big letters, Moscow High School. And there was a hot tub place. It was on Jersey. It was on the main street, I think.
Uh-huh.
And but you could go in the back, and you could climb up this short fence, and a lot of the people were naked in the hot tubs,
Uh-huh.
and so he and his buddies would climb up to get some good viewing action in. But
Uh-huh.
here he had his jacket on, so the police show up at our place,
Yeah.
and they want to know about Thompy,
Uh-huh.
So we had to talk a way out of that one.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that would have been later when he was older.
oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any memories of the family, in those early 70s, mid
Well,
70s times? Yeah. When the kids were still young?
I know Aunt Leslie, of course, Leslie being Leslie, really objected to Amy being up there, on the third floor of the Blue House,
Okay.
and then so we moved Paul down to we had a room with a pool table. Do you remember that?
I remember Paul's room. I don't remember a pool table.
No, okay. Then we probably got rid of it by that.
Okay.
But yeah, he finally made that his bedroom.
Yeah.
And so it was no, we made that into a bar of some sort. I can't remember because there was a bedroom downstairs, but maybe Amy that was there.
No, that was Paul's bedroom. I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by that point, I guess we had taken I don't know if we had the pool table or not, but we made it into a recreation room, and we'd have the students over and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do remember. Of course, this was later on in the 80s, but I remember in the basement, you'd come down the stairs and
Right.
there was kind of like a big room in the basement.
A
And
big what?
a big room.
Yep.
And then there was kind of like a door that led into the Paul's room
That's right. That's
on the
right.
side.
That's right.
The only thing I remember about the bigger room was that you had an Atari video game system.
Oh, what?
A video game system, the Atari.
Oh, Atari. Yeah.
And then you would go down there sometimes and play Centipede with the joystick on the Atari. That was the only thing I really remembered.
Well, we had a
little kid.
bar down there too.
Uh-huh.
Like as soon as you came down the stairs, right on the left was a bar and all that thing. And here's a funny story. We would have the students over for a social, on a Saturday night or something.
Yeah.
And big cadre of the students are all over there by the bar and they're laughing,
Mhm.
So I went over and said, what's so funny? Well, do you remember the big plaque I've got when I got the medal? What's the medal called? Joint Service Commendation Medal.
Okay.
Anyway, I've got it right here over the desk, but it was this big thing and it was on the wall. And they were all laughing. And so I said, what's so funny? He says, well, who gave you that joke? I said, what do you mean joke? And they pointed at it. Turned out I got it on April 1st.
Okay.
They thought it was an April Fool's joke. They couldn't imagine me getting any kind of a medal.
Right.
That was a funny story.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Thinking of that period of time, you had the year in Southern California. You
Yep.
bought the new blue house on C Street. But that would have been around the time your father died, right? 1970,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. He died in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because I remember going back, and I think I got back there before he died.
Yeah.
He was living with my brother in New Jersey,
Uh-huh.
and I was only there 2 days when he died. And Aunt Marion, bless her soul, she came down from, that's my father's sister, right?
Uh-huh.
She came down from Massachusetts to take care of things and what have you. It
Yeah.
was really pretty good. And when they had the wake, uh, probably 20 or 30 sanitation workers came to it
Uh-huh.
because my dad was pretty popular with them because he would go out drinking with them and what have you,
Yeah.
So, so he was pretty social in that respect.
Yeah. So what, he had died of lung cancer, is that?
What's that?
He died of lung cancer, is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. It has spread. Let's see. I'm trying to think if it spread to the pancreas or not. I can't remember, but it's definitely was lung cancer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember maybe it was before he died. I'm not sure. I remember you telling me a story about having a family vacation out to New York.
In New York?
Yeah, to New York City.
Family vacation. I don't remember that.
Yeah, taking the whole family there. There's some pictures I've seen. But I remember you telling this story about how you went to New York and you would have to, you were trying to get the get gas at the gas station.
At the what?
At the gas station. There's this kind of amusing story that you've told me before, where you're visiting New York City and you're trying to get gas at the gas station and you're not getting any service, and you had to start swearing at the gas station attendant. You don't
It
remember?
started to do what?
In the story that you've told me before, you were trying to get gasoline at the gas station.
But that was during the what was the big crisis there when there was no gasoline anywhere? And
Well, no, in this story, it was a story about how you had become very polite after living away from New York for a long period of time.
oh yeah, yeah.
And so then you got fed up and started swearing at the gas station attendant because he wouldn't pay any attention to you.
Yeah.
And then he, as soon as you started swearing at him, he said, like, why didn't you say you wanted some help?
Yeah.
And then, according to the story anyway, then you remarked to the family, you're like, oh, right, I forgot how to speak the language here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because everybody yelled at each other. That's the way you ask for help.
Yeah.
You'd say, hey, I need some help over here.
But I remember you also saying that, like, on that trip, I think it was that same trip where you went to the restaurant. I think your brother, or maybe, I don't know if it was your brother or one of your old friends, got you a reservation at a certain restaurant that was kind of a mob restaurant. You remember this story?
The only mob thing I can remember is your mom and I, we were in Staten Island, and we stopped for lunch at a restaurant, and it was an Italian restaurant on Staten Island, and there was nobody there. It was just your mom and I, and they come out and they took our orders, and then all of a sudden, a guy came in from the side door, and he was obviously some leader in the mafia, and so all of a sudden, all these people came out from the back to pay their respects to this guy, and what have you. And after they did all that, at this point, they ignored us totally. And then at this point, the wife who had stayed in the car came in the far door and sat next to him because after they'd all paid their respects to the mafia boss. And I said out really loud, I said, hey, it's the mafia. And your mom said, shut up.
Well, I remember another one about a restaurant where you would go and you wouldn't even order. They would just kind of look at you and then decide what kind of food you would want.
I don't remember that one.
Really?
Not to say that it didn't happen, but you got any other tidbits from that
Well,
one?
I think it was somebody, your brother, Tom, had like an inn at this restaurant.
Oh,
It was like
yeah,
a,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That
yeah.
that was a big fancy restaurant because
Mhm.
he was really making a lot of money at that point.
Okay.
So he took me up there for dinner when I was visiting there one time, and
Uh-huh.
it was a very fancy restaurant. Yes, and they told you what you were going to eat,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at him like, is that what fancy is?
Uh-huh.
You don't get a choice.
Right.
But my brother was really into that stuff.
Uh-huh.
Because he was always in my shadow, all through childhood.
Uh-huh.
And, so he finally got to be a big shot.
Okay.
And so it was good for him,
Yeah.
And so he wanted to take me to these fancy places, kind of to show off a little bit,
Uh-huh.
so, which was great. So,
Yeah. And then, but he eventually moved out to Littleton, Colorado.
yes. Yeah. Well, first he went to, let's see, he went to New Jersey first.
Right.
And then to Colorado, and he worked for Meyer Blinder,
Okay.
who was, that's when I made all that money on the new stocks
Uh-huh.
when he was working there.
Okay.
And then Meyer Blinder, I think, got arrested
Okay.
for doing something wrong in the stock market. And so my brother though stayed in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and who the hell did he work for? I can't remember. I think it was a restaurant of some sort.
Okay.
And he moved kind of on the other side of Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do remember visiting him there at that time. So,
Yeah.
in fact, he died in Denver.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's see. We're getting close to the wrapping up point for this installment. Anything else that's coming to mind about this period of time during the 70s? I remember your Aunt Ray visited once as well.
I did what?
Your Aunt Ray visited Moscow at one point.
Raid? Is that what you said?
Your Aunt Ray.
Say that again.
Your mother's sister, Aunt Ray.
Oh, Aunt Ray. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was. Yeah. And I've got all kinds of photos of her.
Uh-huh.
And you must have been. Were you born at that point?
No, this would have been, I think, before
Okay.
I was born. Yeah.
I remember holding two of the kids
Mm-hmm.
when we took a picture of her, and she was beside herself. She said, "How can you live in a place like this? It's in the middle of nowhere."
Uh-huh.
I said, "That's the whole point."
The comment I remember you sharing before was that she showed up in town and then she said, "Where are all the people?"
Yeah, right. And I said, "Well, don't be so negative. Let me take you downtown."
Uh-huh.
And then she said, "I still don't see any."
Yeah.
And she was a chain smoker besides.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Well, I guess that's about all the
okay.
time for today. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. And we'll continue on next time. So what are we up to now? What year?
Like 1973, mid 70s. Yeah.
Early 70s. Okay.
That period of time.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
You bet. Take care.
Bye.